Hey guys, how are you doing today? Today I've got a little bit of a different video. It's not too dissimilar to something I have done before, but today we are going to talk about the topic of, is House of Fraser dead? Now, House of Fraser is a department store in the UK, that is where I'm based, and as we all know, department stores aren't having the best time at the moment because of various factors. Most notably, the move to online shopping, which was accelerated by the pandemic. But House of Fraser was a struggling department store before the whole 2020-2021 situation, which we're currently living in. I have done a previous video on one of House of Fraser's competitors, which has since gone from the high street but remains online. That is Debenhams. If you want to watch that video, I'll leave it in the iCards up at top or in the description below. So first off, I'm going to talk about the history of House of Fraser. What is House of Fraser? Where did it come from? And then we're going to move on to what happened to it and look at an example today, and then ultimately round off and answer whether the title of this video, which is now down there, it hasn't been up there for ages, has it? Whether House of Fraser is dead / did Mike Ashley kill House of Fraser? So with the name House of Fraser, Fraser is a very big clue of where this department store originated. It was in Scotland, in Glasgow, in 1849 by Arthur and Fraser. If I am looking down, I have got my laptop here and I have got some notes. And so it was originally started as Arthur and Fraser, and by 1891 it was known as Frasers and Sons. I'm not going to do a too in-depth history, just some overviews with key points and stuff. I might do an in-depth thing if an in-depth video if anyone would like that. Much like my Debenhams video, that was like the rise and fall of Debenhams. If you want something like that, let me know below. So the company grew gradually during the 20th century, and after the Second World War, a large number of acquisitions transformed the company into a national chain. So this is a trend that continued and included some big names, such as Dickens and Jones, which once had a big department store or a big store on Regent Street, which is where H&M, there's a big H&M there, and two of its sister brands are Weekday and Arket, and there's some other shops. I think Canada Goose is on that corner as well. And Harrods, it also acquired Harrods in 1959, which is probably its most prominent acquisition, and Harrods stayed in the House of Fraser group until the 90s. In 2005, it also acquired some big names. So it acquired Jenner's, which is often called Edinburgh's Harrods or the Harrods of Scotland, and BT's, which was a mid-range department store in the Midlands. So fast forwarding a lot, in May 2018, House of Fraser fell into trouble and they said they were going to close 31 stores. I say said because I'm saying it very loosely because it's not really what happened. And then in August 2018, Mike Ashley agreed to buy the business for £90 million. So I looked at I did some research and I looked at the store list that they originally were going to say that were closing, the 31 stores. And the store that I have got some shots of was originally in that 31 store list, and fast forward 3 years on, it's still not closed. So it was kind of saved, as it were. So they said they were going to close 31 stores, and then they must have come to some kind of agreements with landlords and stuff to not close all of them, but some did close. So for example, the House of Fraser in Milton Keynes closed, which was before the pandemic. I think that was around 2019, and it is now a Harrods, not a full line Harrods, it's now a H Beauty. I have done a tour of that store. If you are interested in that, I'll leave that up above and in the below. H Beauty is a concept brand for Harrods. There's only a handful. I think there's only, well, the first one to open was in Lakeside, then it was in Milton Keynes, and I think they've opened one in Edinburgh in the new St James's Centre, is that what that's called? But I will link that. If you want to know more about that, I'll link that down below and up above. But that was quite ironic that Harrods ended up being where House of Fraser was, in Milton Keynes. I believe, don't quote me on this, how Harrods owned the lease of the store, and because Mike Ashley was not wanting to pay certain rents and stuff, they basically said they'll close. House of Fraser will close and Harrods will move in, and that is what happened. When Mike Ashley bought the business in 2018 for £90 million, he said he was going to turn House of Fraser into Harrods of the High Street. There's a lot of quotation marks today. And it has been slowly opening what is called Fraser's stores, which is like a new concept for them. And it's meant to be a bit more of a luxury feel than House of Fraser. So I've not visited a Fraser store, so you'll have to let me know if you have visited one of these. The original Fraser's store, and this is what I think the House of Fraser wanted to base this off, or what Mike Ashley wanted to base off the whole Fraser's concept, was in Glasgow city centre, which hasn't included House of Fraser, and this was way back before Mike Ashley bought the group. Hadn't included House of Fraser before the Frasers group. I don't know how long that's going to be gone on for, but as far as I'm aware, that's not been like that at all. And it included luxury concessions from brands like Hermes and Gucci and like Prada and stuff like that. House of Fraser. So House of Fraser was originally part of the Sports Direct group, and now that's been rebranded to Fraser's Group, which is owned by Mike Ashley, but something happened fairly recently, and I think he's given it over the control to his future son-in-law, but I'm not really going to go into that. That's been in the news fairly recently. And the new concept of Fraser's seemed to be very similar to another brand that's in House of Fraser Group, or what's it called, Fraser's Group, which is Flannels, which is a luxury brand of 43 stores at the moment. So Mike Ashley bought Flannels back in 2017, so before he bought House of Fraser, and he rapidly expanded the chain, which was predominantly based in the north of England, with a handful of stores, and he rapidly has grown that to 42 stores today across the UK. So it's no longer a northern brand. They've got like a flagship store in London and stuff like that, and this is like a luxury brand. They have a really big online presence, I think, as well. So they sell Gucci, they sell YSL, they sell those type of brands, whereas House of Fraser, apart from the one in Scotland in Glasgow, that is something that would never really happen apart from in like beauty and stuff. In my opinion, there was a little bit of confusion about where Fraser's, which is Harrods of the High Street, would lie within his brands, because he's got Flannels, which is a luxury store. But on closer inspection, when I've looked at the Fraser's store in Wolverhampton, which was one of the first concept stores to open, which was ironically in a Debenhams store, an old Debenhams store, which closed obviously when Debenhams, I think it shut before the whole closure of all the Debenhams stores. And it is now a Fraser's store, but Mike Ashley didn't open the Fraser store within the old BT store, which, as I mentioned earlier, House of Fraser, back in the noughties, bought BT's, and eventually rebranded all of their stores to House of Fraser. Wolverhampton was, I believe, don't quote me on it, where BT's originated from, so that was kind of a kick in the teeth for the heritage of the BT's brand, because that was a large store as well. But on closer inspection from this Fraser's concept, it looks like it's very similar to the old House of Fraser concept, with the brands it carries and stuff like that, but just with a more modern feel. So for example, you can see in some of the pictures, which hopefully, I don't know if we'll see if we include them, they have Valentino bags, whereas Flannels would carry Valentino Garibaldi. So if you don't know like the dynamic between those two brands, I would suggest you Google it and have a look into it, because there was kind of a lawsuit against that, and I think it's very deceptive that if you think you're buying a Valentino bag, you think you're buying the higher end version of Valentino, which they're two separate companies, and Valentino's bags have a Valentino written on them, and so do Valentino Garibaldi, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, which is the much more luxury scale brand rather than the Valentino bags brand, which they range from like 200-300, where Valentino's would be over 1,000. So that kind of shows me where Fraser's is trying to sit, whereas like Flannels is obviously, they have like the Valentinos and stuff, whereas Fraser's doesn't. So you can see where that's trying to sit in, which is that really Harrods of the High Street? I don't know. So not all House of Fraser brands stores have been branded Frasers, of which there only seems to be a handful at the moment. I know there's a new one opening soon, if it's not already opened, in Meadowhall in Sheffield, which seems to be on the site of the original House of Fraser store there. But in my personal opinion, some of the House of Fraser stores that may not have been in like top tier cities and stuff like that have been kind of left to the wayside, and that's what we can kind of see in what I'm showing you in the pictures today. So it seems to be much more of a more pilot high culture, and sell it cheap. Like when he first bought House of Fraser, this is my local House of Fraser, by the way, and if you know what it is, please don't mention it down below. It was very Sports Direct originally. When he bought it over, there was like Lonsdale and stuff. It has since changed a little bit, and in a good note, I think when he first bought it, he did have like Fred Perry and stuff in that store with like not a concession, but like had the logo on the wall. And it has brought some brands into my town, which probably in a department store setting would never have been available before. So like Ralph Lauren or Polo Ralph Lauren, not Ralph Lauren, like that would never have been in the store before. And I have actually seen Burberry in this store as well, like one piece or a few pieces just on one rack, just kind of there, but the store is very much more packed. Like it used to be more spread out and more of an edit, I suppose. Now it's more like shoved in and crammed a bit more. So for example, I know he, since buying House of Fraser, Mike Ashley has bought Jack Wills, and you can see that they sell Jack Wills in House of Fraser now in my local store. But this would have never happened in my town before. Jack Wills used to be very much university towns, like tourist places, like high-end tourist places, like more affluent tourist places. It was in affluent places like that. Like my town's not that affluent, but it's not affluent, if that makes sense. Like we would never have had a Jack Wills standalone store, but we have it in House of Fraser. But then, having said that, you can now buy Jack Wills in Sports Direct. So I feel like the brand's not what it used to be, is it? But that's kind of the downward trend of what that brand was becoming anyway, but I never thought it would be in Sports Direct. And it's gone downhill, but the price tag still remains the same from what I've seen in store. And there's also a lot more brands in House of Fraser that you would typically see in like a Sports Direct store. So you have like the Polo Ralph, these wouldn't be seen in Sports Direct, but there's Polo Ralph Lauren, Lacoste, Diesel, Levi's, that kind of end of the spectrum. So like premium high street kind of brand name brands. And then you've got your Carrymore, which I think, does Mike Ashley own that? I believe so. And like you've got Adidas and stuff. So it's kind of a mix of that, which I don't know whether it's because of excess stock or something, but you can definitely see the brand selection probably wasn't what it was. But to be honest, that store didn't used to have a great brand selection anyway. This was actually originally a BT store. And before BT's, it would have been a totally different, well, before House of Fraser, it was a totally different clientele. You'd have like country casuals in there and stuff like that, rather than like Puma and Adidas and stuff like that. And also, there is a game now in, this is a very recent thing that has happened. There's now a game concession in House of Fraser in my store, in my town. But it seems to be, so I know my cashier again bought Game, which if you aren't from the UK, it's a computer game retailer. They sell video games, and it closed quite a few years ago. I'm talking like 5-6 years ago in my town. We had a standalone game store, and it has now been brought back into House of Fraser, but it seems to be a bit of a slapdash attempt, in my opinion, the way they've kind of set it up in that area. That's kind of where, so this is kind of the stuff that shows you what kind of store the House of Fraser BT's type was. They had like a Jack's Vert section where that, like a concession for Jack's Vert, which is a much more traditional old style brand in that area, which is now where Game is on the women's wear floor. So this is what a House of Fraser store looks like in a not primary town. It is a big town, don't get me wrong, but it's not like a city, like a Manchester or stuff like that. This is what House of Fraser looks like now. It's very much pilot high. There's a lot of stock. There's brands that have been bought in that are great. So we've got Ralph Lauren, Barbour. I think they were having Barbour before though. Lacoste, stuff like that. That's a good step in the direction, but they've kind of let everything just there's not been that much investment in the store. So for example, Warehouse is a brand that went years ago, and that is now owned by Boohoo, I think. But they've still got like a Warehouse concession. It looks like massive branding on the back, but none of that stuff is Warehouse because it's not a brand that you can buy in a department store like that anymore, because it is owned by Boohoo, and that is what it is. So there's not been the investment. They've kind of slapdash some concessions like Game and stuff like that. But that store, like back in its heyday when it was BT's, it was a lot more of a classic department store. Obviously that kind of stuff isn't really what's in favour anymore. But after the first lockdown, when I went in the store, it just looked like Sports Direct with a beauty section at the front, basically, in my opinion. It has got better. So I don't know whether this, and originally this store was earmarked for closure, and it hasn't been in the 3 years that since my cashier's bought it. It hasn't been, it's always been at risk of closure, but it hasn't been. He's made some investment into it, but like, no, I don't think, in my opinion, it's kind of this store, I don't think I would go in there now. One, because of the owner, although my cashier is kind of taking more of a back seat, but it's kind of not, it's not the same. And like when you used to go to Oxford Street, House of Fraser was kind of one of the big stores on Oxford Street. Has that closed? I can't even remember. I have to do some research in that. But in my opinion, my House of Fraser in my town is dead. There was really not that many people in there. It was a Friday afternoon I went, which kind of on a Saturday or a Sunday it might be a lot busier, but like I don't know what kind of takings they're going to be taking. And in my opinion, my cashier has kind of pushed the stores that he doesn't really care about to the wayside. Like, they're not his priority. His priority is getting out like Flannels and Fraser stores. Like in Meadowhall and Wolverhampton, the concept of those looks really nice, really polished, really well together. I don't think my House of Fraser will ever have a refit like that. I don't know if the town where I live really needs a store like that. I don't think there's that much of a clientele for that kind of thing in my town. There's like affluence areas of my town, but there's also not. And we do have a Bicester Village is only a stone throw away. So if you want that kind of thing, you would kind of go there, or just hop on a train and you're in London in an hour. So in my opinion, I don't know how long this store is going to last, which is such a shame because it will be a massive empty unit. Although it's not clear, it's not a big House of Fraser, it's not a big store. Like, there's Primarks much bigger than this. But yeah, that was my 2 cents on what's happened to House of Fraser. Let me know what you think. Do you have one near you? What is your kind of opinion on it? Has it gone downhill in your opinion? Is it dead? Let me know. I'd love to hear your discussions in the comments. So yes, thank you guys so much for watching this video. It's a bit of a different one, but I kind of like doing these. This wasn't a heavily researched one. It was kind of me showing you what House of Fraser looks like now, basically, in 2021, in a town, like a mid-tier town, not a big city, and whether it will last much longer. If you like these kind of videos, I can do a much more in-depth of the history of House of Fraser and other brands that are. I've got a list on a spreadsheet of like other brands that I want to do like a rise and fall of, but I will get around to those when I have time, because there's a lot of research and stuff that goes into those. But yes, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you're not already, please subscribe down below, follow my Instagrams, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.